All right. Good morning, everybody. It is March 23rd. Hopefully, you had a good St. Patrick's Day. Did anybody have a green beer or green smoothie? Which one? Green juice.
Green
Good.
tea.
None of the above. All right. We don't want the green juices have tons of sugar in them, right? So that's the thing about juices and smoothies. So beware of that. Today is kind of a great day for us. We kind of reached a milestone with, I think a number of you kind of may know that we had some issues with one of our kids and her health. And so we kind of got good news yesterday. So super happy about that. So I've got an extra pep in my step today. We are going to talk about intermittent fasting today, and we're kind of talking for those of you who weren't here before the 8 o'clock time about this recent. It's not even an article, really. It's a poster that came out at the American Heart Association that talked about intermittent fasting and had this huge, scary headline. So I just wanted to kind of get that out to you guys so that you know kind of really what's going on. And then of course, as always, we'll be open up for questions and all that stuff. So before we get started, Coach Kyle is here. He's got dance class later this morning, I'm sure. So what's going on with the troops, Kyle? Anything of concern or any successes? I mean, I saw really good numbers coming out of people and in terms of the scales, and so people are, I think, just doing very well.
Yeah, you're right. Everyone is doing well. Crowning jewels are sitting here before me. I love it. Had that last couple of weeks of the Well 12 program for a lot of you guys. So just keep up the good work. Use your habits that you developed in these 12 weeks and continue them on. Just be careful when you're going out. People are making really good choices when you have to go out to eat, and you guys are doing phenomenal. You can still enjoy going out, after the first 6 weeks, like just be careful. But everything in moderation and good choices. But you guys are doing super, super well. So no complaints or critiques here.
Perfect. And I will push out information about Well 365. I know a lot of you asked about it. I didn't get a chance to put that out this week, but we'll push that out for those of you who want to stay in the umbrella of Well 12. And then as I said, this spring, that Breath 6, my breathwork program will come out. So if you're part of the Well 365, that'll kind of just automatically kind of push out, at least initially, as I'm bringing the course online. So you'll be beta testers for that. So thank you for that. Any questions from the group this morning? Any things burnt other than do I have a 91% chance of death with intermittent fasting, which we'll get to in a second?
Oh, I have a question.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Go ahead, Deb, and then Sal, or Jane, and then Sal. Go ahead, Jane.
You were talking about the breathing.
Mhm.
Are we getting insight on that on Wednesday? Is that right?
So, all right. Well, thank you. So Wednesday, or actually it's Tuesday this week, I'm
Tuesday.
doing my first master class. It's called Health 3.0, why the future of your, or why your health, what is it? Why the future of your health is in your hands. And really what that is, it's meant, I'm doing that as kind of one of my kind of signature talks, where I'm talking about kind of where healthcare is going. We're spending more money per person than ever in the United States with really kind of the unhealthy outcomes. A lot of people are looking to things like the Ozempics and all of that stuff. Although I'm not going to specifically kind of focus on that, but a lot of people are looking for medicines as an answer, and really just medicines add another layer of complexity into the mix. Where really what we need to do is, instead of, there's this metaphor that goes around, like imagine a fish tank that is completely gross and dirty, right? Like the water is all filled with algae and all that stuff. And kind of what we're doing is kind of treating and sedating the fish rather than cleaning out the water, right? Which is really kind of that root cause of what we want to do. So I'm kind of introducing and talking about a bunch of the literature on diet and lifestyle changes and how that can make a significant effect in your health. You guys are already kind of well ahead of that curve, being part of Well 12, right? So always seeing more smiling faces when you do a talk like that is helpful. So it's Saturday, or sorry, it's Tuesday, 6 p.m. Pacific. In the replay email, I'll put the link. You can register on Zoom. Of course, everything's on Zoom. I think there's about 25 people registered right now. I can have up to 100. I don't think we'll get to 100, but tell all your friends, people who are like, boy, what are you doing? What have you done? Like, I see this amazing difference in you. If they want to kind of have a sense of what's going on and kind of learning kind of the, the kind of what I see at least as kind of the state of the union of healthcare and how it's just moving in the wrong direction. And how you guys are really at the forefront of taking ownership of your health. And that's really, like I said, many times this next chapter of my career is really kind of me focusing on getting lifestyle better as opposed to just the quick fix of this medicine and that medicine, which really in the long run isn't doing the trick, right? So it'll be about 45 minutes or so of a talk. And then, as always, time for questions and answers and stuff like that. But yeah, thank you for reminding me to bring that up, Jane.
Yeah, and where does the breathing come in?
Breath work is a completely separate thing. So with the breath work, breath six is really kind of diving into that sympathetic, parasympathetic heart rate variability kind of stuff. So people have, I think in one of the lectures in the optimized breathing lecture, I talk about different patterns and styles of breath work, and I talk about 3 or 4 6 8 breathe or 4 6 7 breathing, box breathing, kind of all these different things. Well, this is now going to be, imagine like you go to a yoga studio, and they've got the instructor kind of facilitating the yoga, right? So, put your arm, right arm in, left arm out, kind of red circle, blue circle, kind of all that stuff in the like if yoga and twister work kind of somehow married together. So breath six will be then a series of facilitated breathwork classes with like music tracks for different reasons. So a lot of what I'm going to do is going to be a lot of kind of that calming down, kind of that parasympathetic, because in this particular group, I feel that I don't really need to amp you guys up. But I'll probably have like one kind of sympathetic session, meaning one kind of wake you up kind of session, so like a breath work that you can do in the morning, and then most of them will be kind of evening routine or afternoon routine, kind of as the day kind of starts to boil a little bit, just kind of turn the temperature down and kind of cool you off a little bit, kind of mentally and physically, so to speak.
Are these separate from the Saturday class? Or are they within the Saturday class?
This will be, well, I mean, I'm still trying to figure out how to incorporate it best. So I was going to start doing some Saturday sessions with this. And the breath work will be probably about 20 minutes or so. So I don't want to make it excessively long that people are just going to be like, oh, I'm not going to sit here for an hour and focus on breathing. So, with all of this, I try to make it I call it tactical. So something that you can do in your regular life, right? So let's say you're on your lunch hour, and you want to kind of just kind of before the rest of the day launches, you want like a 10-minute thing that you can do to just help relax you and put you in a good state of mind, that parasympathetic rest digest kind of brain working well, kind of flow mode. Well, that's, where the breath work stuff is going to come in, is that, you can do like a guided meditation type thing. So this would be a guided breath work to help kind of relax and kind of calm things down. So that's the idea behind it. It's like I said, you guys will be my beta testers before I roll it out, because I have all these things in theory, and but rolling it out will be kind of an interesting journey. So that's why I'm just going to push it out to anybody in Well 12 and Well 365 as kind of like a perk of membership, but also kind of having you guys help me craft what that is. And then, we're going to have different add-ons into the Well 12 universe. But breathwork, I think, is one that is easily deployable and fun. So that's that. All right, Sal, you had a question?
No, I just wanted to tell Kyle that I'm not going crazy. I'm loading I started last night at 6 o'clock until Sunday at 6. So I'll be doing the release starting Monday. So I just didn't want Kyle to think I went crazy when he looks at my partner.
It's good to know. Yeah, because I would have been like, whoa, what's going on, buddy? Off the
reloads.
I'm going to tell you, it has torn up my digestion. Holy mackerel.
What's that, doing another loading?
Fried calamari when you start to load. That's all I'm going to tell you.
Well, I mean, I think I could have told you that because it's been what, 10 weeks probably, Sal, right? So, I mean, after 10 weeks of eating clean, your body is probably like, Sal, what the hell are you doing? Like your little colon microbiome is like, what is happening here? Like, does he not like us anymore? Like he was finally treating us so nicely. Now fried calamari.
I've been up all night. I mean, you don't do that. That's all I'm going to say. Introduce slowly.
Second loading phase was way harder than the first one, and the first one was hard. Just give you guys a heads up. So if you ever want to do it again, it's a doozy. First one, I'm like, ooh, I get to eat all this bad stuff. This is awesome. And then by the second day, I'm like, I don't want to eat ever again. And then the second time I did loading, I couldn't do it. It was so hard. It was way harder than the first.
Well, Bev's trying to get me to eat this morning. I don't want to look at food. I'm gonna have to wait till this afternoon to
But I mean,
start
but what a
eating.
great kind of example, Sal, of how, probably if I'd told you 10 weeks ago, oh yeah, you get to do this for 5 more days, you would have been like, yeah, game on, right? But now it's just, how your body responds, that kind of not just the physical response to food, but the mental response to eating and eating certain unhealthy foods has kind of changed, and kind of your brain has kind of reshaped, right, when it comes to this stuff. So, it's encouraging to hear. Don't want you to have to suffer through it. You can always do like a healthier load as well. You don't have to go to the fried foods if you don't want to, just putting that out there.
I'm
But,
not doing that.
but what's great about kind of what I'm hearing in there is that you've got that feedback now built in your body that says, look, this is not what we thrive on, right? And something is going off here, right? Something not great is happening. So, I think it's encouraging. Of course, I don't want any of my clients to suffer, but what that means to me, Sal, is that you've really done a great job in these kind of weeks leading up to this of actually following program, eating clean. Your body is now running on what it's supposed to run on. And when you deviate, then you just kind of feel like, something is off, right? And as we talk about now, most of us in the program are kind of in that kind of trailing off few weeks. When we talk about the longevity of this program and how can I stick to it and all that stuff, that's exactly why, is because your body's been now trained to eat so pure and so clean that if you go off rails, and everyone's going to do it at some point in time, right? Let's be real, but you'll feel it the next day, right? In fact, a couple of you guys, I don't know how long you've been on, but I said I went out to a lunch where we were at this Italian restaurant and I had a pizza and I felt like drunk, like I felt hungover the next day. That was actually a lunch with Peter, who's joining the program. Was that we went out to some place in, where was that lake, Pete, that we with
Lake
SM?
San Marcos.
Yeah, so we went in San Marcos and I had a pizza which I'd never had in years or months, and then the next day I just felt completely hungover and stuff, probably from the gluten and all that stuff. It just felt off to me. So all right, well, we'll have time. Oh yeah, go ahead, Linda.
I did the loading last weekend and I had pretty much the same experience as Sal did. And it was great though. But afterwards, man, I've been dropping weight too. But I realize how important it is eating correctly and right and healthy and everything. I'm really seeing more of how more importantly the foods we put in our mouth than really losing weight as much as getting healthy again.
Yeah, and that's yeah,
It's a good
and we talk about
experience.
why. Yeah, and that's why I don't love calling it a weight loss program. Of course it is, but it's just a whole other kind of mindset shift, right? Like, and
It
that's
is.
really kind of as it's designed. So, all right, well, thank you for sharing, guys. I love the feedback. Let's launch into the session here today. All right, let's see that. All right, so we can see, let's see here. Sal, give me a thumbs up if you can see the truth about intermittent fasting on the screen here. Yes, good. Okay, perfect. So today we're going to talk about the truth about intermittent fasting. And as I said, this came from this article that came out, which is really just a poster that came out at one of the American Heart Association meetings that really kind of got me scared. So we'll talk about headlines and benefits. And this is the poster. So I was able to get a copy of the poster. But what it said, so association of 8-hour time restricted eating with all cause and cause-specific mortality. So this is the title. And basically what they say they did was looked at people who followed an 8-hour eating window, right? Which is what we try to follow in the program, which is why when I saw the headline, my eyes popped out of my head like like one of those cartoon characters. And what they found was that people who followed this 8-hour time restricted eating window, so a 16-8, meaning fasting for 16 hours, eating for 8 hours, had a 91% higher chance of all cause mortality, meaning they died. They had a 91% higher chance of dying than people who didn't follow time restricted eating, right? So you want to talk about something that would completely unwind the business model of the Well 12 program. And this is like my kryptonite, right? So of course I kind of took it very seriously when I looked at this. You know, as you read the paper, some things really kind of pop up. Number one, when you look at, you know, the number of people who are smoking, right? And they don't, part of the problem here is they don't give a lot of details about these things, but almost 20% of the people are like 15 to 20%. But when you look at the people in the less than 8 hour eating window, 27% of them were smokers, right? So that is much higher than the normal kind of what we'd expect to see. So what did they do in the study? 20,000 adults in the United States who participated in this, it's called NHANES, National Health and Nutrition Database, who were said to follow a 8 hour TRE, time restricted eating, that's what TRE stands for, window. As I said, we're said to have a 91% higher risk of death. How do they do this? So they, of these 20,000 people, I guess they were doing surveys at a regular interval for this, the study that they were a part of. And so these authors then found people that had 2 surveys of 24 hours of food intake. So they went backwards and said, tell me what you ate or how you ate or when you ate during the last 24 hours. So they had to do 2 of these surveys. And it was unclear when they did this. So let's say they asked on day 5 of a 3-year study, and these people said, yeah, for these 2 24-hour periods, I ate in a less than 8 hour window. They were then included in that time restricted eating window, right? So imagine, you know, you're asked twice kind of what you did, and that then affects, you know, your outcomes over years and years. I mean, like, how many people here have eaten a bowl of ice cream when they went to bed at night, before they went to bed, right? A lot of people, right? Very common thing. So imagine I said, okay, well, in the last 5 years, you had ice cream twice. So let's see how that affects your mortality. And then I said, well, people who eat ice cream before 30, you know, within 30 minutes of going to bed have an XYZ percentage of death, right? It doesn't really kind of make sense. So unclear kind of when the study was done, not really clear that 2 episodes of 8 hour eating, because they could have eaten around the clock the rest of the time, and they're just included in this 2 hour window. So it just doesn't make a lot of sense. Other than the smoking, they didn't release a lot of other comorbidities. So this is just a clinical trial design thing. When we look at clinical trials, you want to know, you know, the average age which they had, you know, gender, diabetes, smoking, which they released, any active cancers, you know, cardiovascular disease, any of this other stuff. So we don't really know much about the patients who were studied. But I think the biggest thing that happens here is something called recall bias, right? How many of us have, I don't think we have any dentists here, but how many of us have been to the dentist, and the dentist, oh, that's right. Sorry, Sal, you're a dentist. All right. So Sal, you can probably speak to this. How many times did you have patients come in and you ask them, hey, are you flossing every day? And they say, yeah, of course. I floss, you know, 8 times a day, right? And then you go in there and dig out like chunks of like last week's dinner, right? I mean, people want to remember things correctly, but they also want to remember things to help please the person who is asking them, right? That's something called recall bias. So when you ask somebody, you know, did you eat within an 8 hour window, right? You guys can probably tell me exactly the meal times that you had because you're following everything in the Practice Better app. But you know, how many people are actually doing this, right? So as we are now seeing people talking about the study and kind of all these different things, I think a lot of these holes are coming out. You know, honestly, I feel bad for the authors, you know, and one of them came from a junkie university called Northwestern, who happened to win their first round NCAA March Madness tournament yesterday. That's where I went to college. But, you know, I mean, I think they were very well intentioned. But it just, you know, it wasn't the right study, but it definitely garnered a lot of headlines. So I'll kind of leave some time open here. Let's get some questions out of the way. I see Sal raising his hand. So that's what I'm going to say about the study. Sal, did you have a question about the?
Well, it showed that 65% were drinkers.
Well, that's, I mean, this is a
If
sick.
you're on our diet, you're not drinking.
Well, I mean, if you're, yeah, I mean, like so many people drinking, I mean, a third of people smoking, that means in, you know, if this group were that group, right? So there's what, 11 people in here right now. So that would be at least 3.6 smokers in here, right? Like, I mean, obviously you guys are selected out because you care about your health and you're here, but it just, it's just not representative, and it's just a weird study. And like I said, it was one of these in a sub basement with leaky pipes dripping on the computer projector and all that stuff, and somehow it garnered all this excitement. But this is really, I don't think, anything that we need to be nervous about or worried about in terms of real impact, right? I think if nothing else, one of the great things that it's done is this brought intermittent fasting to the forefront. People are now asking questions, and that's why I'm going to be on the news talking about this in a few days. And I'll push out some YouTube videos and reels and all that stuff about the benefits of intermittent fasting, because as we'll talk about in the subsequent slides, there are a lot of benefits and a lot of really robust science that's been done. The other thing is that this is what's called an observational study. So that data, you can draw correlations, but you can't say something called causation. So it's hard to say because these people ate twice in a less than 8-hour window, they definitely have this 91. You can say that it's associated with it, and even that association is kind of weak. It's like me saying, how many of us have white cars? Who in here has a white car? Right? Wow, that was actually a lot better than I thought it would be, right? Well, if you own a white car, according to that population, you have a 48% chance of enrolling in the Well 12 program, right? That has nothing to do with anything. You could have a polka dot car, or a love bus with sunflowers painted on there and join, right? So that's a correlation, right? So I can say, well, oddly, 4 out of the 11 people, or 4 out of what was that? It was like 6 out of the 12 people on the call. So 50% of the people happen to have a white car. Oh my gosh, that's what a coincidence that is, right? But you can't say, Pete, I'll get to you in a second, but you cannot say, if you have a white car, that's a 50% chance that you'll succeed in the Well 12 program, right? That would be a causation that I would be inferring that doesn't make sense. Yeah, Pete, go ahead.
I think I know what intermittent fasting is, but could you define it? Is it 8 days or 2 days?
Yeah, so funny that you asked. Let's launch into the program. It's almost like he's part of the shtick here. So we'll talk about that. So intermittent fasting, right? What is it, right? And here's the slide for you, Pete. So there are a lot of different ways to do this, and so they all fall under calorie deficit eating strategies, right? So don't eat as many calories. And so there's one called continuous calorie restriction, which is where you just eat all the time, but instead of eating 2,500 calories, you eat 1,000 calories, right? And so these are things like Lindora, or like Weight Watchers with their before Weight Watchers got corrupted and they're dealing with Ozempic now, but those were the point systems and all these different things that probably a lot of you have tried. Is we're just going to eat around the clock, but we're just going to shrink how many calories we're eating, and that should be of some benefit. So that's the continuous calorie restriction kind of model. And then there's intermittent fasting. And so intermittent fasting has several different types, right? So number one, as just going from left to right on the diagram, there's something called alternate day fasting, where you eat on alternate days of the week. And when we say eat, right, that's normal eating. And then on the fasting days, generally people are kind of restricting it to about 400 to 600 calories, right? So you're eating like a full, 2,000, 2,500 calorie day, divided by 400, so 25/4, 25/4, like that. There are alternate day fasting models. So there's something called the 5-2, where you're eating 5 days out of the week, and then for a 48-hour period. So for 2 days, then you're restricting down to like 400 to 600 calories. And then there's time restricted eating. So that's kind of what we employ in Well 12, which is reducing food intake down to 8 to 12 hours daily. So a lot of you on the intake, when we have our first session, I say, all right, well, let's start with, if you can't do the full 8 hours or the full 16 hours of fasting, let's start with 12 hours and then kind of bookend that in down to 8 hours, right? A bunch of you heard me kind of say that in our session. So there's some science behind that, right? So you want at least 12 hours, as we'll talk about. But the longer you can go fasting, the more your body is working on its own energy stores. I'm going to talk get a little bit nerdy today, sorry, but we're going to have a bunch of biochemistry models or things in here to just kind of show you where the benefits are. So these are the different models of eating. I personally find that, a 5-2, or sometimes people do what's called a 30, I think it's like a 35. So they'll eat for 30 days in a row and fast for 5 days straight. in my line of work as a doc, and for most of you people, I don't think that I can devote 5 days to just like fasting and feeling like garbage. There's a guy, a biohacker guy by the name of Peter Attia, who some of you may have heard of before, listened, super smart guy, trained at Hopkins, kind of he was like a semi-pro cyclist, like on the Tour de France, like Tour de California, kind of all that stuff. So a really well-accomplished guy. And he would, go on these like 10-day fasts and check his testosterone levels and all these hormone levels on a regular basis. And by the time he got to day 10, he had like no circulating testosterone, like his energy was garbage. And he was trying to do this to live longer. He was doing this for longevity work. And for me, I'm a very much quality of life is just as important as quantity of life, right? Because in my line of work, I've seen people who in the last 10 years of their life are just homebound, can't move, their teeth are all falling out, so they have to eat soft foods or, all that stuff. And that's not how I want my final 10 years to look. So I really kind of want quality of life, right? And I think that's what all you guys want as well. So these alternate kind of long fast 5-2s and things like that, I honestly feel that there may be some benefit, but you're not getting incrementally that much more benefit from just doing the 16-hour fasting, 8-hour eating, which is something that you can do on a daily basis. Essentially just skip breakfast, right? And then during that 8-hour window, kind of make sure that you're eating healthy foods to really give your body what it needs, So that's at least my thought. Great question. All right, so this is one of the biochemistry slides when we talk about intermittent fasting here. So mealtime is actually a strong entraining cue of peripheral clocks. So your body becomes used to certain times for things to happen. So how many of you guys remember, like in high school, when you had that class just before lunch and you'd start to feel hungry, right? And then you ate, right? So your body became used to eating at that time. That's why it becomes very important for our bodies to eat during certain windows of time, because that circadian rhythm actually gets set by our meal times. So when you look at kind of the fed state here during time restricted eating, and I know there's a lot of things here, mTOR is a very important protein, mammalian receptor of tobramycin, but it is one of these that is really involved in protein synthesis. And you can see that during the time where you're eating, right, you activate mTOR, and then the CRVs or clock-related variances. So what happens is when you're eating now, it promotes these clock genes to say, hey, this is my awake period. And then when you're fasting, what happens on panel B here on the right side here is in that fasting state, you activate something called AMP-K. You've heard me talk about AMP-K probably before. That's that switch that goes from carbohydrate metabolism to fat metabolism. It has a number of other regulations as well. But what happens is the AMP-K activates degradation genes, or degradation proteins, I should say, for these clock genes that keep you awake. And kind of at the 10,000 foot level, what that means is at nighttime, when you're not eating, right, your body increases the proteins that help you sleep. It degrades these clock awake proteins and gets you to kind of calm down and gets you to sleep. I mean, isn't that super interesting? I tell you, the more I learn about the body, the more I'm just fascinated with how it works. But so when we're eating, that's your body says, hey, you know what, I'm awake, I'm alive, let's go. When you're fasting, it says, all right, food's not available right now. Let's kind of turn off the engines here. Let's get some rest. And you go and remember, AMP-K is also that switch that puts you into that fat metabolism mode that we'll talk about here again in a second. So now instead of expecting food to come from your digestion, your body is now using the fuel that it's accumulated and stored during the day. And this is kind of a lot of the reason where intermittent fasting helps activate fat loss, is because you're now using up the stored energy, right? So fasting then also impacts metabolism, right? So your use of sugar versus fat, but also risk factors for chronic diseases, as we'll talk about here in the next couple of slides. So this metabolic flip switches after about 12 hours of fasting. So you go from this carbohydrate/sugar metabolism mode, which is a lot of the foods that we eat have a lot of carbohydrates, have a lot of sugars, into the fat metabolism mode. So when that happens, then when that shift happens after at least 12 hours of fasting, we have depleted the liver stores of fast acting stored sugar, something called glycogen, And now we are mobilizing free fatty acids into what are called ketone bodies, which is a little bit, that's kind of what keto does, ketogenic diets. But this, what we're mimicking here inside Well 12, is the more natural version of being on a ketogenic diet. So now we are chewing up our free fatty acids to make these ketones. Ketones actually enhance mTOR. So I talked about mTOR a couple of times, right? So when you're during the daytime, when you're activating ketones, you activate something called sirtuins, which are proteins that help increase your resilience to stress, injury, and disease. They also increase mitochondrial stress resistance, antioxidants, DNA repair, and something called autophagy, which is where your body gets rid of cellular debris. So if you are in this kind of ketone state, as you're going about your daily business, your body actually goes into this repair mode so that you're still functioning, you're still activating energy, but rather than kind of causing more breakdown, you're actually in a healing mode even as you're functioning around, right? So super interesting. And this is just an example of that. So when we're doing this intermittent fasting and caloric restriction, nutrients will of course kind of go down because we are now kind of reducing our intake. Here's mTOR again, but this is the sirtuin protein here. Sirtuins are a set of proteins that you may hear a lot in the next coming years involved in longevity that then activate the FOXO PCG, NRF genes that help in this antioxidant repair mode. But also the sirtuins go to the mitochondria. Remember our friends, the mitochondria that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, right? So it increases mitochondrial biogenesis. So you're now creating more mitochondria because you're able to mobilize those free fatty acids, which mitochondria really love. And that's what leads to a lot of that neuro benefit, as we'll talk about here in a moment. So I know it's a lot of confusing stuff, but there's just so much good science that we have to kind of get rid of the bad science. So endocrine benefits, you're going to enhance insulin sensitivity. You're decreasing ghrelin. So remember, ghrelin from a couple of weeks ago was one of the hormones involved in satiety that kind of tells your body that you're not ready yet, so or not full yet. So we are increasing our satiety. We're enhancing insulin. In the GI system, one of the things that we're seeing a lot of, unfortunately, is something called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or now they call it metabolic associated fatty liver disease, where people who are insulin resistant, right, you have so much sugar going around, your body doesn't know what to do with it, actually then turns it into fat, which is a storage form of energy, right? And that has nowhere to go, so it infiltrates the liver. And now we're seeing, in the United States, at least now that hepatitis has been cured with all of these Harvoni and all these other medications, we're seeing now non-alcoholic fatty liver disease or metabolic associated fatty liver disease as the most common cause of liver transplantation in the United States. I talked a little bit, I think, about nanoplastics. Did we talk about that in this group at all? So yeah, I think we talked about it. So nanoplastics are these plastic kind of fibers that are less than 100 microns in size. The COVID virus was about 25 to 50 microns. So we're talking about microscopic particles that unfortunately we're now getting from things like plastic water bottles and cosmetics and plasticizers. And I was just on TV talking about the masks that we had to wear during COVID and how we're inhaling a lot of these particles. There's a New England Journal paper that showed that if you had carotid plaques that had these micro nano plastic particles, that you had a 2.1% higher risk of cardiovascular death because these things are inciting inflammation and all these problems. So you're going to hear a lot about nanoplastics coming up, but another equally scary study was they put mice, they infused these mice with a lot of these nanoplastic particles and put them in a high fat, high sugar diet. So kind of mimicking what we call the standard American diet. And the mice who had the higher level of nanoparticles had a 10x higher risk of going to liver failure than the mice who had wait, let me say that again. The mice who had nanoparticles plus the fatty diet were at a 10 times higher risk of developing fatty liver disease and liver failure than the mice who just had nanoplastics alone, or the mice who just had a high diet of fat alone, right? So it's this combination of diet as well as exposure to nanoplastic particles that was causing this non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. However, with intermittent fasting, when you are going on these ketone bodies, you're now changing the body's metabolism. So you're able to then break up these fats in the liver. And we are actually seeing then improvement in scores of fatty liver disease in people who are doing intermittent fasting. There's one interesting study. I don't think we have anyone who celebrates Ramadan in the group, but Ramadan is going right now, which is kind of the Muslim period of fasting, kind of similar to Lent, right? During Lent for Catholics, you try to stay away from meat. I went to Catholic school, so we always had Fish Friday, right? But during these kind of religious times, so they did the study, and during Ramadan, they actually saw people who had an improvement, something called the 5-4 score, their fibrosis 4 score. So less fatty liver in people who already had it because they were now able to use those fats more efficiently, right? So even if you're not Muslim, you're going to have the same results, right? What we see, decrease in insulin or improvement in insulin resistance, decrease in inflammatory markers. Cardiovascular benefits, of course. So meta-analysis of 19 studies show that time-restricted eating lowers systolic blood pressure by about 6 to 10 millimeters of mercury. Hey, for any of you who are on a blood pressure medicine, amlodipine, hydrochlorothiazide, chlorthalidone, spironolactone, ACE inhibitors, all of these things, that's about as much benefit as you get from any blood pressure medicine, is about 6 to 10 points. That's why, depending on how high your blood pressure is, sometimes you have to stack medicines on. But if all you do is do intermittent fasting, you can potentially have as much benefit as with a blood pressure medication. Long term, remember, inflammation drives blood pressure as well. So if we're then intermittent fasting for a while, eating healthy foods as you are for a while, decreasing inflammation, that blood pressure is going to normalize. And hopefully a bunch of you guys have seen that blood pressure improvement with program. Additionally, intermittent fasting decreases serum triglycerides. One of the prior participants in Well 12 was so happy to share his data with me. He had a 250-point drop in his triglycerides just from eating healthy alone, which is like blow your mind kind of levels, because you really have to be on a bunch of medicines for that to happen. But here we are doing it with diet, right? So what an amazing thing. Total cholesterol goes down, LDL, bad cholesterol goes down. This has been vetted in 4 or 5 different trials of time-restricted eating, and an increase in HDL. So that's the good cholesterol. So that's actually what you want. And when we talk about time-restricted eating and calorie restriction, very similar to that mouse study, is that if we really want to get the biggest bang for our buck, you do the time-restricted eating plus calorie restriction, and that shows the greatest benefit in blood pressure control, which is exactly what you guys are doing in Well 12, is that we're not just restricting the time that we're eating, but we're also changing the amount of calories that we take in. So you guys are seeing kind of the science behind why I designed the program as I did. You really get that boost in blood pressure response. Blood pressure goes down, heart risk goes down, brain risk goes down for Alzheimer's, all these different great things, right? Cancer. Boy, what an amazing story. Unfortunately, poor Kate Middleton, right? I don't know what her Duchess of whatever her title is, but really kind of, I feel bad. I don't know her for anything, right? But you just feel bad that she just came out with this cancer diagnosis. So the American Cancer Society has listed several cancers that are increased in risk with obesity and metabolic poor health or metabolic syndrome. So colorectal, right, which is colon cancer, rectal cancer, kidney, esophageal, endometrial, breast, pancreatic, liver, thyroid, ovarian, gallbladder, prostate, non-Hodgkin's. I mean, that's basically like every cancer, right, is enhanced with obesity and metabolic disruption, right? So if we can get ahead of that, improve our insulin resistance, kind of get to a healthier weight, that will improve. So American Cancer Society said that about 8% of oral cancers, so mouth cancers, and about a little bit over 6% of all cancers are related to poor metabolic health. So we can slide that risk down for ourselves. Interesting stuff, though, as I was researching this, is time-restricted eating has actually been shown to improve the effectiveness of chemotherapy agents, particularly something called tamoxifen, which hopefully none of you know what that is, but in case you do, that's one of the mainstays for breast cancer. So time-restricted eating actually makes chemotherapy more effective, and it reduces the resistance to chemotherapy agents. And part of what they think happens here is, remember we talked about at the beginning of the talk here about entraining that circadian rhythm, so that we are, our body knows when we eat that's the time to be awake, and when we sleep or when we fast, that's the time to rest. Well, they think that happens at a cellular level. Those clock proteins and sirtuin proteins that I talked about help regulate the growth of the cancer in a very normal cycle. So by doing the time-restricted eating and timing the chemotherapy as those cells are trying to divide, you can actually stop the cancer or I shouldn't say stop, but you can reduce the growth of the cancer, and you make those chemotherapy agents more effective, because now you know exactly when all those cells, or most of those cells, are trying to divide, right? So amazing, right? Like, unfortunately, I don't know how many of you had a cancer diagnosis in here, and you definitely don't have to share if you don't want to, but how many of your physicians talked about dietary things that you can do to make your chemotherapy more effective? It's just not something that we talk about, but there's data that shows that we should, right? Amazing. Neurodegenerative. So a lot of the stuff that happens in our brains as we get older kind of gets thrown off because of circadian rhythm issues and also autophagy. Remember, I said that's taking out those cellular waste products. So time restricted eating helps regulate that cycle so that we can get rid of the waste products, right? That's also why we focus so much on sleep in the program, because you need to be in that stage 4 REM sleep. For those of you who've watched the sleep optimization videos, we need to enhance our sleep, and particularly those 2 phases of sleep, so we can get rid of all the cellular waste products, so we can really engage in this autophagy idea, get rid of the crap, take out the stuff from our brains so that we have a clean system and our brains working again. I don't know if I shared this with I can't remember which group I shared it with. So I have the same 8 stories that I tell over and over again. But my wife and I years ago went to Greece on a vacation, and we really spent a lot of time in the islands, and then we saved one 24-hour period at the end to be in Athens, to see, the Acropolis and all the things that you're supposed to see in Athens, and then we flew back home. Well, when we went to the islands, we went to Crete, went to Santorini, beautiful. This was before kids, so it was a great time in our lives, and we rented a car and drove and saw the beaches and stuff. And then when we got back to Athens, we stayed at a hotel near the airport and then just took the train in. And there was garbage everywhere. We didn't know that there was a garbage strike, but when I say garbage everywhere, it was like piles and piles of garbage to the point that cars couldn't pass through. And that was the idea of the garbage collectors, right? And their strike was to really kind of cripple the city so that it couldn't work until they got whatever labor demands they had. And then all of a sudden everything worked again. So when I think of autophagy and sleep and all these things, that's kind of what's happening in your brain, is that we are accumulating these waste products, these bag of garbage everywhere, so the normal brain processes can't happen. But if you focus on sleep, right, so that gives your body the time to get rid of the waste products. If you focus on the right diet, so we're giving you the proper fuels that you need, and you're doing the time restricted eating, you're giving your body, your brain, everything in the time that it needs and the fuel that it needs to take the garbage out so that everything can work again. Anyway, so time restricted eating decreases neuroinflammation, so the inflammation in the brain, decreases oxidative stress, so all those free radicals and things that we talk about, that disrupt DNA synthesis. I think we talked about that a few weeks ago. It increases insulin sensitivity in your brain, to get the brain working better, and it enhances mitochondrial biogenesis in the brain. So your brain is able to create more mitochondria. And one of the thoughts with like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, is that your brain just doesn't have enough mitochondria to support its utilization. So as a result, then the brain process suffers because it just doesn't have the energy that it needs to do what it needs to do. So as we talk about kind of ad libitum eating, so this is eating kind of around the clock versus time restricted eating. And here they kind of depict this in a 12-hour window. What are some of the benefits? So you can see the sliders go up on weight gain, fat mass, insulin or glucose intolerance, insulin resistance, right? That all gets higher with ad libitum eating or eating around the clock. With time restricted eating, all that stuff goes down. So weight gain, fat mass, glucose tolerance, or glucose intolerance, I should say, and inflammation goes down with time restricted eating. So a lot of benefits to this. And this is vetted out in science. I found a couple of great review articles for any of you guys who are interested. We can definitely share that. It gets a little bit sciencey, but I just didn't want you guys freaking out. Oh my God, I've got a 91% chance of death. I think anytime you see in a scientific article a 91% chance of something, there's a 91% chance of bullshit, right? Because nothing is really that strong. And we really rarely see any treatment effects. I mean, even in cardiovascular trials, one of the biggest effects we saw, believe it or not, there's a time when aspirin was controversial, right? Should you give aspirin to someone having a heart attack? Now we give it out like it's a ticker tape parade, right? But the IBIS-2 trial, which was done in the late 70s, early 80s, showed a 50% reduction in cardiovascular outcomes with giving, I think it was like 500 milligrams of aspirin in that clinical trial. And people were like, whoa, what, 50%? You cannot be serious. There's no way you see a 51% chance of anything, right? And it turns out that, yeah, that was correct, but people balked at 50% back then, right? So, seeing a 91% of anything, I don't have that skill. I'm not like an actor to be able to raise that one eyebrow and suspicion like Sherlock Holmes. But I mean, there you go. John's got it. Man, John, you're like crazy. But if I could, that's exactly what I do is be like, something seems a bit fishy here. Let's dive into it a little bit further. And sometimes with these clinical trials, you have to do a deep dive to poke holes in the armor. But this one, it was just kind of floating at the surface, right? So, as with anything, don't believe the headlines or don't freak out about the headlines. Take a moment of pause, look at the information, look at the data. If you see something, a number of you are great about it, shoot it over to me and ask me, hey, Dr. B, what do you think about this? But, I think that this study really, the greatest benefit of the study is that we are now talking about intermittent fasting because I do think it's so powerful. And the nice thing about it is it's so free, right? You don't have to buy anything to intermittent fast. You just have to not eat, right? So I think that it's something very approachable for a lot of people, but it's just got so many great health benefits that, I just, I thought we'd have to talk about it. So, all right, I'll shut up. What questions do you guys have for me? I'm sure we got a lot of questions popping in your brains. Yeah, go ahead, Lisa.
I noticed on the funding for that, it said funded from something, something China, and then it said disclosure none.
Yeah, so
Did you see that?
yeah, so on the poster. So yeah, disclosures and funding are two different things. So where you get your funding, you have to tell, the American, who would be, the American Diet Association or whatever, that's where we got our money. Disclosure are like personal conflicts of interest. So I am for me personally, like I'm a speaker for, this drug company, right? That's something I have to disclose. That doesn't mean that every talk I do is funded by that same drug company, right? Because I can talk in Well 12, which is honestly funded by you guys, right? But I'm not speaking on behalf of Jardiance or Plavix or whatever drug there is, right? I try not to get too kind of crazy about that, but and one of the places was Wuhan University, right? So, oh my God, everyone's brain is popping, and do you guys know what the Epoch Times is? It's like a very conservative newspaper. So I did a discussion about this paper actually for them, and I said, and the authors were from Northwestern, where I went to college, and here, and then Wuhan University, and that's all they wanted to talk about was Wuhan. I mean, what do I know I know about as much about Wuhan University as I know about Gonzaga. Is that I see them every March Madness, right? They seem to do well in the tournament, and that's all I know about Gonzaga, right? So that's as much, but they wanted to like focus on China, evil China, kind of all these things. But yeah, I mean, I think, you bring up a good point is whenever you see studies like this, follow the money, right? John's our finance guy, right? So we can stick him on this, but there's an agenda behind these things, right? Even those Netflix, the Game Changers and Forks Over Knives and all that stuff, who's that funded by? It's actually funded by a vegan protein powder company, right? So yeah, of course they want more people to eat vegetable protein because they want people to buy their shakes or whatever, right? So, I mean, I think that's generally going to be the clearest line. I think these guys were well intentioned. I don't want to, I feel like, they're going to be like social pariahs in cardiology circles. And I think they were just trying to do the best they had with a limited data set. I haven't seen any live interviews with these guys, but, across the board, they're getting beat down. Even the American Heart Association is taking crap for this, for allowing this poster in. I think these guys wanted to do something that we need to do, which is look at things that people are doing and question whether or not they're of benefit, right? Like, so, I want people to understand that. I think that they're trying to do this with a pure heart. It's just, the science was very limited. So, and they, if you look at the poster again, they're not even the ones that said this 91% thing. They just, very kind of blandly put their forest, it's called the forest plot. So what things are associated with what degree of mortality and stuff. And someone kind of latched onto this headline, and it's now just, it went from like being like a match that you throw in the woods to now the whole, national park is on fire, from one little spark. So, I think they tried to do the best they could. But if nothing else, like I said, it's brought this discussion of intermittent fasting to the forefront. It's put me on air a couple of times to be able to talk about this. But you know, I think it's good to question things, right? Because I think it was Mark Twain, right? It said it's not what you know that gets you in trouble. It's what you think you know, but just ain't so, right? He said something like that. Somebody can fact check me on that. So, you know, we have all these assumptions that we think are key, right? I mean, how many of us lived in the era of, well, everybody knows you need to eat 6 meals a day and graze through the day because that's what cavemen did and that's what healthy is, right? That was the narrative during the late 90s, early 2000s, right? And so people were eating 6 meals a day and they kind of looked at guys like Michael Jordan and all these athletes and they did, you know, they performed better. But then we have to realize that Michael Jordan is very different than Sanjay Bojraj, right? Like he's performing a very physical activity. You know, Michael Phelps was eating 12,000 calories a day, right? Because to support when he was training in his Olympic hopes, you know, Lisa Kusi does not need to eat 12,000 calories a day, right? Because your expenditure is different. So, you know, I think it was good to have this out there. Great that we're having the discussion. I just wish that they could have kind of toned down that headline a little bit. Sal, did you have a question? Or Pete, did you have a question? Yeah, Pete, go ahead.
So I routinely don't eat for 8 to 10 hours pretty much every night. You go to bed 7:30, 8 o'clock. I mean, you stop eating at 7:30, 8 o'clock. Don't get up till 6:37. Is that enough fasting, or are you talking about fasting for 2 days?
Yeah, so we're not talking about fasting for 2 days. You know, 12 hours is really where you start to see that metabolic flip happen. So you said you're stopping to eat at 8
So
and you're waking up around 6:30 for breakfast. Is that kind of
I
so?
don't have breakfast. I have yogurt. That's it.
Yeah, but you're breaking the fast when you have the yogurt, right? So that's really kind of a 10-hour window. You know, so what you can have that doesn't break your fast, like this is black coffee, water, herbal teas, those sorts of things are okay. So what we want to do is kind of bookend that, you know, start at a 12-hour fast. That's where you're going to see the benefit. And the more you can kind of bring in that fasting window, the more your body will go into that lipolysis mode. Lipolysis, sorry, the science word is the biochemical term for breaking up fat for energy. So metabolizing fat, chewing up fat, basically.
That's 7 days a week.
That's 7 days a week. Yeah, exactly. I mean, anybody here actually do 7 days a week? Probably somebody has, you know, sneaks in a breakfast here and there. But oh wow,
I
look
do
how
7 days.
look how great all of you guys are.
I
But
am.
but every once in a while, you know, like even for me, like, you know, because as I try to do fasting with working out, but like if it's like the morning after a heavy lift and my body is just screaming, you know, I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I eat, you know, I'll eat something sensible. Like I'll have like egg, like a hard-boiled egg or a protein shake or something, you know, but I know I'm breaking my fast. But the rest of the time I try to stay pretty on top of it. So you really need to get in that 12-hour window at least of fasting. Interestingly, when we talk about circadian rhythm training, they talk about ETRE, so early time restricted eating. So, you know, the greatest benefits, particularly in women, like menopausal women or postmenopausal age women, seems to be an early fasting window. So, meaning that you're eating from like 8 a.m. to 2 p.m.,
And I know that.
right? You shift that, and then you're fasting from 2 p.m. onward. So the data suggests don't eat after 3 p.m. And that's where, you know, people, at least women, seem to get that greatest hormone balancing effect and stuff in the literature. You know, I can't do that because I don't like it, just doesn't work for me. And I guess I'm not a postmenopausal woman either. But I don't need I might identify at some point, but that's a whole other conversation. But you know, you have to fit this into what you can do, right? So for my wife, for instance, she loved that early eating window. So she would eat like after, you know, she would eat her dinner, right? She would eat breakfast and then like a late lunch, and then she did okay with it, right? And then she really got a lot of that hormone balancing kind of benefit. Me, not so much because kind of the mornings, kind of the way my body is, I've never been a big breakfast person. So it just naturally fit in for me to start at noon and go to 8 p. You know, a lot of times what I do is then kind of even tighten that window up into a 6 hour window. So I'd eat at noon and then at 6 p.m. and then kind of nothing else. And there's some improved metabolic benefit for that. that's been shown. But a lot of this is just figuring out what works well for you. Remember, I said at the beginning, for those of you who did the intro session, I know Pete, it's a little bit unfair. I haven't given the intro talk yet, so great questions. But one of the things I say is that we kind of work with your circadian rhythm, so that working with your body, not against your body, right? And so a lot of times, particularly with the circadian eating, is that we're trying to figure out what works well for you. Are you an early eater? Is that better for you, or late eater? A lot of us have these psychologic cues at nighttime that we think are hunger, but are really just kind of conditioned responses, right? I'm used to eating that bowl of ice cream at night when I'm watching Wheel of Fortune or whatever, the evening news or whatever it is they're eating. That's a psychological connection that's made. And so every time you watch the news, you feel like you should have a bowl of ice cream in your hands, right? Your body doesn't need the ice cream, but you just associate the two together, and those associations are very strong. So it takes a lot of determination to break those ties, but it can be done, right? So when we talk about these windows of fasting and eating, the first week or two, and I told this to everybody here, is try the best you can to get into that 16:8. If it's 14, 14:10 or whatever, just try to the best to go the longest. If you absolutely can't, that's cool. We start with a 12-hour window, so stop eating at 8 p.m., have something at 8 a.m., with the goal over the next 6 weeks, particularly during that restriction phase, or the ramp up, or the what is it, what do I call it? I'm having a brain
Release,
fart.
release.
Release. Thank you. God. Can't believe I had a brain fart here. But during the release phase, right, that 6 weeks time, as we get deeper into that phase, then trying to also decrease that time window where you're eating, and that's where you're going to see a lot of the benefit, and that's going to kick off the weight loss and the fat metabolism and the brain improvement, decrease in neuroinflammation, all those things.
Go ahead, Sal.
No, go ahead. I can wait.
Oh, I'm just going to have two comments. On the very last conclusion, it starts off with, these findings require replication.
Right.
So, I mean, so they haven't even replicated it.
Right.
So that just says a lot too. And the other comment I was going to make is, I've treated the fruit as my dessert.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll wait a little bit and not have the fruit right away after dinner, but
Okay.
I treat that as my dessert, because that's where all the natural sugars are and everything else, and for the most part seems to do the trick.
Yeah. In fact, the fruit is your dessert. and part of the reason it's important to have the sugar, and then we talked about cortisol last week, right, is that I wanted, when designing this, you need to have that satiety. Remember, we talked about the hormones of satiety and the hormones of eating a couple of weeks ago. But that sweet kind of kicks off to your brain that we're okay. We are not in a state of calorie, deficit here, or calorie restriction, because sweet foods are naturally high in sugar, right? So it tells your body everything's a-okay, right? So that's exactly right. And you'll find now that when you go to other foods, like, so it's funny that someone was talking about loading. When I did my first load, we got this mango sorbet that I still remember. It was just amazing. It was like, it tasted like the mango had just been plucked from whatever mango tree grows, and then put into the sorbet. I mean, it's so fresh tasting, so great. And I still think about it. And we went to the store last night, and they actually had the same sorbet. And I'm gearing up for another release here coming up. So I'm like, let me buy it, and let me have some. But when I brought it home and I had the first spoonful, it just tasted so oversweet to me, right? Like, so sugary. Like, I couldn't handle, like, I did not have that same reaction the first time, right? I think of it lovingly, like the way you think of your first kiss, or, your first car, like, oh, remember how great it was, my that mango sorbet, right? And then I'm just like, oh my God, how did I ever eat this? It's the same company, same size tub, same everything, but now I treat it so much differently, because my body's just not used to that much sugar at once. And I'm like, I don't think I can eat this. Like, this is crazy. So I gave some to my dog, who loved it. But now poor Ziggy's going to get diabetic now. But I mean, it's amazing kind of like how your sweet receptors, if you will, kind of change during the course of the program, and kind of what seemed like a normal sweet before now seems like oversweet. So for me, like I've talked about my Costco runs for blackberries and blueberries and stuff. I mean, if you get a good batch of like we got an amazing batch, like when you go to the store and you're like, oh my God, these berries look so good, right? Like, so we got an amazing batch of raspberries and blackberries last week, and it was just such a um fulfilling sweetness, right? I think there's a difference, right? Because you're like, wow, like I'm eating nature, right? Like I can feel the difference in the sweetness that I'm getting from this, as opposed to sweetness that I get from like a cookie or something like some other kind of artificial kind of thing. So you know, what you're saying, John, kind of completely makes sense to me is yeah, your brain shifts and yeah, all of a sudden berries become too sweet, right? And I think I've talked about it before. Your taste buds kind of change. It's like when your eyes kind of get adapted to the dark. And as you're coming out of a movie theater, there's the big windows there, and it's like, oh my God, like there's just too much sun, because your eyes are so used to the dark. That's what happens to your taste buds, is that your taste buds become so used to natural flavors, natural foods, the phytochemicals that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, right? That when you do eat something now that's processed, or you do eat something that is, really sugary, your brain is just like, what is this garbage, right? Like, I remember in like our must have been a high school biology class or something, they gave us saccharin tablets to kind of taste, and like the sweetness was so overwhelming that it almost had this like bitter kind of taste to it. And that's what we're doing is realigning kind of what your body needs to what your brain is used to, right? So that was my hour-long question, your 30-second or hour-long answer, your 30-second question. Sorry. So
Just,
that's the problem, right?
just food in general tastes really good. The food, the clean food we're eating, it just is like, oh, it's so good. And it's not because I'm like overly hungry. It just tastes good.
You just, like there's this, I think I talked about it before. Did I talk about Chi Running, this book that I read years ago, Chi Running? When I was doing like my marathons and all that stuff, it's just this different way of running. But the last chapter is about intentional eating. And I've done this lecture in here before, so maybe I should bring that one back up. But what you want to do is eat something that at some point had life force in it, right? So that eating, it sounds kind of creepy, but when you think, when you talk to like Native Americans about kind of when they kill an animal to eat, there's a ceremony associated with it, and they thank nature and the elders and all that stuff for giving them that life to eat, right? Like it because it brings life to them. So kind of very similarly, when we eat, I'm like, all right, was this thing alive, right? And a Cheeto is my famous food, right? Is shaped the same as a carrot, but the carrot has an intrinsic life force, right? If you don't eat the carrot, it gets moldy and dies. Whereas a Cheeto, you can live around, you can leave outside in the sun forever, and not even, animals want to eat it, because like I remember like Ziggy, he sniffed a Cheeto one time and he like just, he's like, I don't want this thing, right? Because it doesn't have that life force in it. So as we approach the foods, you want to have something that has life force, right? That will, with each spoonful that you take, is this going to help me live longer? Is this going to make me live shorter, right? Is a very kind of quick thing that you can do mindset wise. So, yeah, absolutely. Normal foods taste good. Sal, let's get to your question. I don't want you to feel unloved.
Two things. Stuart,
Yeah.
when you're speaking, you refer to things like the sleep study that you did or lecture that you gave. Where can we find those? Are they on wellness12.com?
Yeah, I'm getting my YouTube channel up and running, so they'll be all on the YouTube channel for you guys. So give me a
Okay.
couple, give me a couple of weeks, kind of a lot of plate spinning, but yeah, I'll post those up on the YouTube channel.
And the other thing you were talking about, intermittent fasting and chemotherapy. There's a guy up at UCLA
Mhm.
that actually makes his patients fast while they are taking chemo, whatever length of time that is. And I won't say what the percentage increase is, but I want to say it increased the effectiveness of the chemotherapy twofold. But
Yeah.
don't bet on what I'm saying. But
I mean,
think
but I
that's
mean,
what.
whatever the number is, even if it's a 2% improvement, right, in chemo, like you're gonna take it, right? So yeah, why isn't this something that we're talking about? Why isn't something that is kind of more commonplace? And it's just, and I don't want to make, I can't, of course, make claims, right? I just haven't studied it in Well 12, But, like post-op, there've been a couple of patients or clients rather in Well 12 who've had surgery. And they said, my bounce back from surgery was so much better this time than before. And part of that is now that we have kind of revved up your body's repair mechanisms with the fasting and the right food and the antioxidants and all that stuff, is that your body's just become more efficient at healing, right? So, like what took you probably 2 weeks to bounce back from, not saying you, Sal, but, someone, what takes someone 2 weeks to bounce back from surgery, now they're, up and moving around on post-op day 3 or 4, because your body has become so much more efficient at repair, so much more efficient at healing. And so one of the things I'd love to do is kind of work with orthopedic surgeons and do like a study to show kind of what ambulation times look like, pre and post a knee operation, in people who do Well 12 versus people who don't. Because I think that it would show that they're, of course, everyone's different and you can't make claims, but I would suspect that you'd see a pretty significant ambulation improvement. I think of my own father-in-law who did not do Well 12. Nobody, like, for those of you who are healthcare people, you probably know this, but like your family are like the last people that are going to listen to any of your advice when it comes to health, but they're always the first to ask. So they'll ask, but they never listen to what you have to say, but they just want to do their, check off the box that they ask, right? Sal, I see you shaking your head there as well. So we're
I
happy.
know the feeling.
Yeah. So, so my father-in-law had a knee operation and his post-op, luckily he's doing okay, but his post-op course was horrible. Just pain and couldn't move. And then he had to get a repeat surgery and kind of, was on a ventilator, and it was pretty like dark days for us. Luckily he's bounced back fine. That was over a year ago, so he's good. But I'm like, wow, why aren't we kind of priming the pump kind of before surgery, right? To give your body the best shot that you can to do best after surgery, right? Because if you're, it's why not, right? So, the chemotherapy information is interesting. I mean, and of course, UCLA being an academic center, this guy probably does research in time restricted eating, and that might be his area of expertise. And so, but why is it that one guy, in all of SoCal, one guy is doing this as opposed to everybody doing this, right? Why aren't all cardiologists talking about advanced lipid profiles? Why am I the heretic, in front of the church, preaching my gospel of these advanced lipid profiles and all these things that clearly clearly show demonstrated benefit? Why am I kind of looked at as like this weirdo when we have all this great technology available? Well, it's because I'm interested in it, and I feel like it's something that, that's my purpose, is do stuff like this and to advance health. But it should really be something that's commonplace, particularly if there's good data behind it, right? So, but good. Glad to know that someone
You
who's
you said something, or I read it somewhere, where it says if you follow this eating plan 100%, you'll get 100% result. If you follow it 80%, you won't get any result.
Yeah,
And
I mean, I mean, it sounds like something I would have said in the way that I say a lot of crazy things. But yeah, I mean, it's you get out what you put in, right? So, and particularly when we're talking about these cellular mechanisms, it doesn't take much to unwind any sort of progress, right? So if you are all in, that's where you're gonna get the greatest benefit, and I think maybe that's in the book because I talk about logging your foods and all that stuff, right? So, if you're all in, doing everything that you're supposed to, success will just naturally follow, right? Whatever that success looks like it'll be an improvement in your health, it'll be improvement in your blood pressure. Maybe it's weight loss, maybe it isn't. I think a lot of people focus on weight loss so much because it's something you can measure. But, when we look at your symptom scores and things like that, people just feel better, people do better, right? So, like there was someone in the program who, they thought that she was getting tested for Alzheimer's, and then she did the program, and then all of a sudden her brain is working better, right? So many different benefits. So you'll get some benefit. It really just depends on what is the lowest hanging fruit and what's the benefit that you really need. So, all right, well, I've got you 10 minutes over time, so thank you for putting up with me for an extra 10 minutes out of your week. Yeah, Pete, go ahead.
No, just say thank you very much.
Oh, okay. All right, well, thank you.
The block. Look forward to hearing from all the success from everybody else. I need to lose about 50 pounds to have a total knee operation, which I've been putting off for years. So tomorrow finally came. I'm not going to lose weight tomorrow. I'm going to do it today. So thanks very much, Sanjay, for letting me join in.
My pleasure. All right. And then Debbie asked about the Randy cycle. I'm not familiar with the Randy cycle, Debbie, so not really sure. The book that I mentioned, Kate, is the program book. So the Well 12 book that, listen, the Well 12 manual that you guys all got in programs. So that's the book I'm talking about. Maybe I'll write a book one day. New York Times seller. I don't know about bestseller, but hopefully people buy, at least somebody buys a copy. I'll buy a copy and I'll get it on the list, I guess. But that's the book that I'm referring to. All right, I'll stay on if anybody has any individual questions. Otherwise, enjoy your Saturday. Everybody's March Madness bracket is busted from that Kentucky game. Kate, I'll send that out in an email. Part of the reason I am I didn't put it out there is I'm switching credit card, like what I use for credit cards. So I have to get that set up, but you guys will still, I'm not like kicking anybody out. You guys will still have access until I can get that up and running with a new credit card processor. So we'll take care of that, but I'll send out information. All right, gang. I love the tulips there, John and Tal. All right, bye, Linda.
Take
Bye,
care.
Sal.
Thank you.
I'm gonna, can you stay on just for a moment?
For sure. All right, Kate.
That's okay. I mean, this was a general question, but I know over the last 12 weeks, you mentioned different blood tests. Is there somewhere where we can get a listing of the different blood tests? Because I'm going to be getting my blood tests in the next 4 weeks.
Okay.
And I'd like to add as many tests. I know cortisol was one of them, but there was, you've mentioned a bunch.
Yeah, if you can just shoot me an email, sanjay@well12.health, and I'll just send it to you in an email, kind of the list. It's nothing really remarkable. And then, I mean, remarkable meaning that most labs should be able to do them. I'll put kind of specifically on it. Do you go to like a Quest or LabCorp, or where do you go right now?
Quest, I believe.
Okay, good. So Quest will have the advanced lipid profile and stuff that I like. So I'll put that on there. The next version of Well 12, I'm just getting kind of all the back end. That's why I have to switch credit card processors and all that stuff. Will be where I will be actually doing lab work as part of the program. So you can order, like I can follow your cholesterol and I can follow this, and really kind of turning this into almost like a concierge type kind of cardiology practice, like for cardiometabolic risk and stuff. So that's like the next evolution. There's a lot of back end stuff that needs to happen on that, but eventually I'll be able to just say, all right, yeah, we can just send out a lab kit to you and get this figured out. But yeah, in the interim, yeah, just shoot me an email and I'll just put the list of the stuff that I like on there. So it's advanced lipids, ApoB. You can check a cortisol level if you want. It's if you're not having a lot of stress type things, but I think your job kind of leads to a lot of stress. So we can check a random cortisol. And ApoB. Yeah, so I'll just put the list of stuff on there if you shoot me an email.
Sure. Because yeah, my